So Jason, the 1986 habitat policy, to summarize it in one sentence, was no net loss of capacity of fish habitats. Now that's clearly not worked out.
Right.
There was something that was developed in 2012 called the Cohen Commission. Mm-hmm. Can you just for context for the listeners, explain very high level, what was the Cohen Commission? And the follow-up question is, of all the recommendations that came with the Cohen Commission, which is not the Cohen Commission, which is the anti-money laundering, different money laundering. So the Cohen Commission 2012, high level, what was it? And is there even one of those recommendations that was followed through on that you could speak to?
Right. Well, the Cohen Commission was looking into the cause of the 2009 Fraser River sockeye decline, which was at the time a very alarming and I think the worst decline on record that had been seen. And so that the commission was launched. And then interestingly, it's a bit of an aside, but interestingly, in 2010, one of the best returns in the last 50 or 60 years came in that nobody expected. And it was a fantastic return, but that didn't stop the business of the Cohen Commission trying to understand what had happened to contribute to the 2009 decline. And he did a lot of study. It went on for years. I spoke as a witness at a couple of the different sessions, as did hundreds of others over time. But his takeaway was there is no smoking gun. There is no single thing that's the cause. It's a number of things. And then he pointed to a number of recommendations. I think there were 76 recommendations or something. And I would say a number of them have been acted on, but I don't think the full suite of everything that Justice Cohen recommended has been acted on fully. And many of them have been only acted on in a limited way. And you started this thread, Andrew, by asking about the 1986 habitat policy. And one of Justice Cohen's recommendations was to fully implement that policy. And I was active in the department at the time. What happened was that the government of the day decided to change the Fisheries Act, and the policy went away. And so the response in terms of did they follow through on Justice Cohen's recommendation was, well, we don't need to do that anymore because the policy is gone. And I'm giving a short answer to something that has a much more detailed and complicated story. But that's an example of something that I think Justice Cohen's recommendation was perfectly reasonable. It was sound advice and was not fully applied.
So we as a society turned a blind eye to it. We knowingly eliminated the recommendations by getting rid of the policy.
Well, in that case, I don't think that's a national policy.
Right.
And Justice Cohen's recommendations were specific to sockeye and the Fraser River.
Okay.
So it wasn't that much of a cause and effect, but it had that result.
Okay. The PSF first announced opposition to open net farming in 2018. Now, in this latest budget proposal by the federal Liberal government, they've proposed what they call sustainable aquaculture management, with the intent to transition out of open net pen salmon farming in coastal British Columbia waters by 2025.
Yes.
So we hear all this stuff about how nasty and how bad farmed salmon is. How bad is it? What's the impact of allowing farmed salmon? And this is Atlantic salmon. This is not the BC coastal species, right?
Yeah.
So talk to that, please. So listeners really understand straight from the people who see this every day.
I can make a couple just comments right off the top. Number one, when PSF made the statement that we did in 2018 that we would like to see a move away from open net pen to closed containment, we want to be clear that we don't think that we should get rid of aquaculture, because there's aquaculture for shellfish, there's seaweed aquaculture, which has a lot of promise as a new industry. And we simply believe that we need to be doing, our focus is wild salmon. That's our one and only focus, right? And we just think that the way salmon farming is done in our British Columbia waters needs to be done in a way that will protect our wild stocks. Why? It's mainly around the passage of pathogens that can cause disease. It's sea lice, Sea lice are naturally occurring, and they are just as they kind of sound. And, anybody that's ever had a kid at school in the winter and knows about lice, well, there's sea lice as well. They get on sea animals. And these sea lice do naturally occur. But what we find, the research shows, and this is global research, it's something this industry's never been able to control, is that when you have all of these farmed animals in tight quarters, small space growing very large, artificial conditions, the sea lice volume obviously is going to increase exponentially. And those sea lice go right through those pens and glom on to wild fish that are going by. And we have that area of the northern Strait of Georgia through Johnstone Strait. That's a very tight gauntlet, and it's filled with fish farms. And
this is up the northern part of Vancouver Island.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. And so the challenge of sea lice has never been able to be controlled. What does sea lice do? When they accumulate in too large of a quantity on any fish, they cause the fish to be less healthy, ill. It's not going to perform as well. It's more likely to die. So this has been documented by lots of researchers that we trust up in that area, that you see a very large prevalence of sea lice accumulating on our wild salmon as they're going by these fish farms. And again, the industry has not really figured out a way to solve that particular conundrum. And then on top of that, we entered into a research program several years ago with Fisheries and Oceans Canada, with Genome BC, to basically take what was the human genome project and apply it to salmon. Wild salmon, hatchery-produced salmon, and fish farm-produced salmon. And what we really wanted to find out, what are all these pathogens that we can identify that are potentially to cause illness in fish? And we documented new pathogens that we had not seen here before. PRV is one in particular that has been discussed quite a bit, that can cause something called heart skeletal muscle inflammation, which is not good as it sounds. And this has been documented on farms, but also on wild fish. And this is something that was not here before fish farms were here. And so based on that science, we felt that it was in the best interest of wild salmon that industry needed to change how it goes about doing what it does. And there are ways to do it differently. You can move into closed containment, large swimming pools on land. There's research being done in the Scandinavian countries where this type of aquaculture was, pioneered around closed containment in the ocean water. But at the end of the day, Andrew, that's not my job, is to figure out for an industry that has done very well in British Columbia for decades how they should do what they do better. The reality is that our science shows that from a wild salmon perspective, they do need to do what they do better. And we're very happy that the federal government chose to put a policy in place that will mandate that industry move to a closed containment approach by 2025.
By 2025.
This is something supported by many First Nations, many conservation organizations. There are also First Nations who support continuing aquaculture, and many coastal communities that support continuing aquaculture as it's done, because it is an economic factor in their communities, and we respect that.
Yeah,
I don't take any issue with that. Our focus is on wild salmon and the health of wild salmon, and we think that making that change is for the best. Again, it goes back to this notion of there are so many factors that have a potential negative impact on Pacific salmon. If we value these animals as being part of our history, our heritage, and still our economy, and so critical to the environment, 130 some different species of flora and fauna need those fish to do that life cycle, to return and die for them to be able to survive. Bears, eagles, trees, the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
Bugs. The whole ecosystem needs it, and we know that that's challenged. Well, if we are going to make that a priority, then we've got to try to find every little pothole and issue along the way, and if we can fix it, we should fix it. And we think that this industry needs to evolve. I think the other point I would make about this is coronavirus and COVID is a good sort of analogy in this context.
Sure it is.
What I think we have suffered from for a long time is the science debate, right? well, we have different science than your science. Our science is better. And back and forth. And I think a lot of that is intended by the industry to sow confusion. And what I would simply say is if we have learned anything from the coronavirus, it is the importance of what is known as the precautionary approach, the precautionary principle. Just because you don't have every single piece of evidence that you need to say there's potential for harm or risk doesn't mean you shouldn't act.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
You have to act. If you know that this has the potential to harm people or in this case fish, wild fish, you must act. And so we're very happy that the government of Canada and the government of British Columbia has a similar approach that they're taking, that there is that move to use the precautionary approach. I mean, we've just gotten done talking here about how horrible things are for many of these stocks. What more do you need?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
To know.
Well said, Michael.
But Andrew,
Yeah.
I could jump in.
Yeah.
I sometimes reach for analogies. We're here in a financial management institution, and maybe one way to relate to this for people that don't follow salmon or aren't into the sciences, just think about your portfolio, right? The little bit I understand about managing money, which is not very much, is smart money managers have a portfolio. They diversify it, and they try to not expose their whole portfolio to the same risk.
Right.
So
Very
think
true.
about salmon that way. Right. If you do, let's say somebody's a bad operator in the interior of BC and they do a bad job logging, what are they going to affect? They're going to affect one little slice of the BC salmon portfolio. Now let's look at an open net pen aquaculture farm on the coast of British Columbia. The entire British Columbia salmon portfolio is exposed to that risk.
Right. Good point.
It's not localized. And so a good money manager, again, as much as I understand it, is never going to take their client's investment and say, I'm going to expose your whole portfolio to this risk.
Yeah.
And yet we are
good
in
analogy.
the case where that is being brought forward as something that is worth it in the case of wild salmon. Now, this is not because Mike or I have a beef particularly with the aquaculture sector or the industry or the coastal communities that really do want and need jobs in their
Sure.
neighborhoods. But what we're saying is, think about the effect, not just on your local landscape, but on the entire West Coast salmon portfolio that swim past your waters.
Sure.
And we say in that light, we really think supporting a viable transition is the way to go.
Yeah.
And that's why we take this position.
Yeah.
Again, it's not the position of the Pacific Salmon Foundation that aquaculture is a bad industry. We've been talking recently to people from the seaweed aquaculture industry. And we don't really have much of a seaweed aquaculture industry in British Columbia right now, but it's been done in Asia for hundreds of years. And seaweed can be used certainly for food, but
My kids love it.
Cosmetic,
They
yeah.
Nonstop.
Every
time I go to the grocery store.
You kind of, as I do research on this, it's baffling the amount of things that seaweed can be used for different types of products. And this is an industry that wants to get going here right now, but they need government to help them, get a regulatory system and a unique system in place that will help them succeed. And what they're projecting is, upwards of 300 jobs, $1 billion a year in economic activity because we have so much coastline and ocean water and the ability to do this. And here's an industry that actually could help ocean health. Right? Because we need more
growing plants
kelp
effectively.
and eelgrass, that underwater vegetation. And so I don't want people that hear this to think, PSF against aquaculture. No, let's do it better for wild salmon. And let's try to find other aquaculture industries that maybe could help replace some of those jobs that get lost if there's the transition from open net pens to, or when there's the transition. So it can never, anytime someone wants to sort of boil these things down to black and white or A and B or zero-sum game, be very careful, right?
Sure.
And I, again, think we have a lot of abundant opportunities in our ecosystem right here in British Columbia that we're not, under kind of the blue economy, that we're not fully realizing. And that's something we should be doing.
Yeah, I agree. That's a really good point. Let's turn to talk a bit about the three main groups that take salmon out of the waters: commercial fishermen, indigenous communities, and sport fishing.
And fourth is seals.
and the seals. The seals. Get the shotgun out.
Yeah, that was for all my angler friends.
So let's talk about those groups, and without trying to point fingers at any of them, because I think we're this is a tragedy of the commons, classic case of tragedy. This was written by, I think it was Adam Smith wrote this concept a couple hundred years ago.
Right, yeah.
So
you're taking me back to my history of economics
at
university.
So when I look at this stat, when I see the Fraser sockeye salmon run of 250,000 and 16 years earlier was 4 million, I think to myself, well, and maybe again I'm simplifying, which I know you don't want me to do, but maybe we just say, why don't we just stop fishing altogether? Like say they run for 4 years, so why don't we just say for the next 4 years, there ain't no fishing, folks. Indigenous groups can't fish, commercial fishermen can't fish, sport fishermen can't fish. I know it's only one part of the solution, but if you stop taking the fish out of the water, doesn't that improve their chances of repopulating? Or is that too hard of a
I would
ask?
say it does, but that something that we speak to regularly, and I believe this is, it's really important for people to care about salmon and have that connection. And fishing is one way we do that. It has economic benefits, but like we're with the Pacific Salmon Foundation, there is no such thing as the Pacific Red-Sided Shiner Foundation.
That's right.
Right? If you were a true pure ecologist, they're just as worthy on the landscape, but people don't have a connection to them. They don't know they're out there.
Yeah, that's right.
They're not charismatic. They're not part of the fabric of how British Columbia, how Canada sees itself.
Right.
Salmon are, and that connection is really important. And so I think the idea that we try to support at PSF is we believe that maintaining that interest of those constituencies, the people who go fishing for all the different reasons, is vitally important for the well-being of the salmon, notwithstanding the economic or harvest or rights benefits that also are there. But even if all you do is say you want to do it for the well-being of the salmon, I think the idea of maintaining that interest, that access is really, really important. And then it comes down to more, well, how do you do that? And it tracks right back to the opening of the conversation around if we had better science and better information, we could have a better idea what's going on out there. So you might have known between 2004 and 2008, oh, something's changing. Maybe we need to start doing some things differently, plan our fisheries differently, plan our restoration and enhancement differently, so that we're getting ahead of this curve instead of being behind the curve. And so I realize that's not sort of the direct answer that you were heading towards, but I think it is the way that we have tried to respond to that from PSF, which is the constituency is an important part of the interest in doing the good things to help salmon. And we don't want to lose any of the people from those constituencies. And we think by helping support salmon, it supports those interests in people who want to go fishing.
Yeah.
And that's kind of been our story, is let's lift them back up. Let's not focus on fighting over the last ones. Let's be honest about where we're at, but how do we help lift them back up so that people can maintain that access and secure that interest?
Yeah. One of the things that Jason said it perfectly, I really shouldn't say anymore, but I'm going to make a personal comment, and that is that one of the things that I know Jason will agree that's very fulfilling about getting to work for the Salmon Foundation is you get to talk to people about their stories of salmon, right? And, we all have them. And it is the great common denominator and thread that connects us are the fish, right? I mean, I grew up in Ohio on the lakes, fishing, not for salmon, but I grew up fishing, and I have so many wonderful memories of, being dragged out of the bed at my grandparents' cottage before the sun was up by my grandfather with a thermos of coffee and going out on that boat with him. And each weekend a different grandchild got a weekend to come go fishing with grandpa, And Jason has stories of his youth, fishing, being on the water. He's got kids, and he's teaching them. I have a daughter, these are, my point here is I get to talk to First Nation people all over British Columbia and visit them. I get to talk to people that are not First Nations that live all over British Columbia, recreational anglers, commercial. At the end of the day, we're all people. And we all have these stories of the connection to the salmon, to the fish. So, at the end of the day, these structures, these political structures, dichotomy around commercial, recreational, First Nation, I think when you get to a point where we are right now, Andrew, with a lot of the concerns we have about many of these stocks, a lot of that is kind of melting away because people are getting back to that bottom line. We want the fish to survive and thrive, so that even if I only go out for a couple days of summer and I take my grandkids or my kids out, I can, right? And Jason's point too is one that's so important, is because we support these volunteer community groups through our community salmon program. You cannot get people to do something for anything unless they have a personal connection to it, right? And fish are tough because they're in the water. You don't see them a lot of the time. So any opportunity we can create to get people who otherwise might not interact with salmon, get them out to see the environment, to see the fish, to handle the fish.
Let's to wrap this up, let's talk about the PSF and some of the primary sort of projects you've got going. One in particular, which is your community salmon program. It's a grant-making program that supports volunteers and community-driven organizations. You kind of highlighted this a little bit already.
Yeah.
To undertake salmon conservation and restoration projects in BC and the Yukon. You've got a marine science program. You have other initiatives like the dead boat removal, hatchery studies, climate change activities, Big Fraser participation. So why don't we spend a few minutes talking about your plug on what PSF, Pacific Salmon Foundation, does. You guys have the cool stickers I see on people's cars all over the place.
Well, thank you for helping today let us come on, because we need to get more bumper stickers on people's
100%.
cars. That's the key.
Yeah, and that's the plug at the end, and I hope all the folks are listening right to the end, because this is a good conversation. So let's talk about some of the really high level stuff. What are some things you're really proud about the Pacific Salmon Foundation?
I think you have to start when you're a nonprofit with what is your mission, right? And our mission, and we've talked about, we're for the wild salmon. Obviously, that's our number one only constituent. But it kind of comes down to a few core points. One, we are a catalyst, and by that it means that we want to help make things happen for salmon and see positive results for salmon. We do that mostly by, I often describe us as a mutual fund for salmon. We've got lots of people that will invest money with us through donations, and they trust us to then go figure out where are the best places to invest those funds to make a difference for Pacific salmon, right? And so that's being a catalyst, right? We get funds and then we put them to the best possible use. And that means trying to have an impact, obviously, that you can measure for salmon, whether it's habitat that's been restored or number of fish that got back to a stream that you help fix, tracking, but be able to measure things, right? But I think it also has kind of an economic and social value in that we're very good as a nonprofit of levering funds, right? So our community salmon program, for example, historically, for every $1 that we give to a community group in a grant, they then go raise another 6 or 7 at the local level. I mean, imagine if your mutual fund portfolio was doing that kind of return, right? Like you wouldn't even be doing these podcasts. I'm just kidding. But so that's a part of the message we have to our donors as well, is that we've been around for a long time. We've had a very good board of directors. We've had always very good finance committee and audit controls. We're very well run. We have a clean, independent audit done every year. And so we're a good steward of resources in that context as well. The other thing I'd say about our mission is that we're independent. This is really important. We are not an advocacy organization. That position we talked about with the aquaculture was the first and only time we've ever taken a position on something.
Interesting.
We want to make sure that we are at as many tables, invited to as many tables as we can be invited to. Government tables, business tables, philanthropic tables. We want to be open to working with as many people as possible, because again, as Jason said, we've got to get more people caring about salmon. So that independence piece, being nonpartisan, being non-adversarial, right? And what that mostly comes down to is like I was talking about earlier, where the science wasn't being done, we started doing it, right? Because science and evidence really is the backbone of everything that we do. So that mission of being independent, a catalyst, and a thought leader, I think is critical. We talk about that every day. We think about it every day in the context of when we're asked to do things or put grants out. But in the context then, moving from the mission then into sort of what we do, we really have three pillars, three business lines, if you will. One is the community salmon program.
Okay.
We get about $1.5 million a year from people like you and me and Jason who buy a saltwater fishing license and then also buy the $6 salmon conservation stamp.
Okay.
That's the saltwater federal license. The provincial salmon stamp, incidentally, is $15, and we think ours needs to be at least that amount. But that's a challenge we've had in getting that. All your listeners should please call their MP. We need more money in the stamp.
So we get that $6 from every stamp.
Yeah.
Adds up to about $1.5 million a year.
Okay.
And we get that money via agreement from the federal government, and then we use that money as the core of the grants that we give out to community organizations to do salmon.
Okay.
And when's the last time that was increased?
The stamp, well, the good thing has happened recently that they've now indexed it to inflation. So
Okay.
it's going up a few
Went up 12
cents,
cents,
every year
Yeah.
it's going up, which is good. We've had a proposal before the federal government for many years now to increase it to at least $10.
Yeah.
That would be a nice
Peanuts, right?
Yeah.
So that funds, along with corporate donations that we
Yeah.
get, our grant making program that a couple hundred groups a year all throughout BC. There's many in Port Alberni, for example, that have come to us over the years that we will make grants to them to do any number of things related to restoring a stream, running a hatchery, an education program. The second program pillar is around science.
Okay.
We've had an extensive marine science program now for almost 10 years, which is, in short, trying to understand what are the limiting factors in the marine context for salmon. And that includes things like water temperature, food availability, loss of marine habitat, kelp and eelgrass. We've documented all of this in great detail and continue to study all of this under our marine science program. Our hatchery effectiveness program I talked about earlier falls under our marine science program. And then the last pillar is our data and informatics program. And this is to get at this challenge we have of we've got a lot of data that needs to be filled in order to best manage. You don't have data, you can't manage, right?
Right. Yeah.
So we have an outstanding group of colleagues that go out, work with First Nations and other conservation groups and community groups, and they unfurl these detailed maps of watersheds, streams, and rivers, and they really get into the nitty-gritty of where are their salmon, what have the numbers looked like historically, and this is all then put into what we call the Pacific Salmon Explorer database, which is now we've got about 80% of the conservation units covered. I mean, and this is just
Really?
the last 10 years, so big, and it's it's for the DFO, provincial ministries, people that are making decisions around the landscape associated with salmon. We're making decisions about fisheries.
And it's just to build on what Mike's saying, it's a really significant piece of work because you would think that you could go to some government website and say, what's the status of the salmon population, whatever, in Port Alberni?
Yeah.
You can't. There is no such place. It would tell you the status of the salmon and the status of their habitat. And so the work that our Salmon Watersheds program team has done to build the Salmon Explorer has been gathering all this information that is collected by government departments, by First Nations, by community organizations, et cetera, and starting to put it into a form that we are used to nowadays, where you can go on Google Earth and click anything.
It's like combining census data and Google Maps and mapping and putting them together.
Exactly. And so that's what our team has been doing, and it's one of a kind product for Canada, and it's fantastic. And it's still being built in terms of the background details. Like it will get better, but you can look at it now.
We can see it now.
You can look at it now, and you can get the information that our team has been able to extract, and they're continuing to build and refine it.
And it's hard, again, history major, when you try to describe to people the importance of data and informatics, which is the ability to visualize the data. Right?
Sure. Yeah.
And that's the step that we're now getting into that I think is so exciting. And that is to take the information and work collaboratively with others to figure out a plan for that watershed, right? And so we just had some new research come out with the Central Coast First Nations, up same area where the river's inlet area is. And it looks at basically it's called a priority threat management. And it takes our data and the data of the First Nations, conservation organizations up there, and it says, all right, wow, here it all is. Now, let's cost this out, and let's figure out what can we do, prioritize what we can do, and then let's get on with the plan of actually doing it. So I say it's data and informatics. It really sells it short because the long-term vision for this thing is it is a tool to improve. It's a tool for planning the actual recovery and restoration of salmon. Right.
Right on. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a foundation for actual evidence or information-based action.
Yeah.
Right. Instead of the three of us guessing.
Yeah, sure.
What do you think the best thing to do would be? This gathers data, organizes it, allows people to look at it, to weigh the different cost-benefit scenarios, and then make a choice. It's very much along the lines of how you invest. It's actually smart
because then it probably also, if I use the analogy from a building perspective, it's like creating shovel-ready projects so that you can take this to some politicians and say, like to the federal, the Department of Fisheries and say, here's a project.
I think that's a good point. That's a really good point, Andrew. I think we haven't thought about it in that way that you described it, but that's right. That the priority threat management approach gives you kind of that output that you could say, look, there are all these things we can do, and this one's so expensive over here, we probably can't do that. But here are ones that we can do.
Yeah.
We just need X, Y, and Z in order to make it happen.
Yeah.
But do you know what the Salmon Explorer story, as one example, illustrates is, as Mike has described our mission, we look for these niches that are not filled by the existing system. Right? Government's been collecting information on salmon, and First Nations know their territories and know where the salmon spawn and where the important areas are, and sport fishermen, know what's going on in the watershed. It's never been organized and compiled so that people can use it. And so this is one of those places where at PSF, our team had said, that's a place we can help. There's all this stuff going on. But we can be a bit of glue. We can pull stuff together, we can organize it, and we can find something that would be really helpful to salmon. And so the Salmon Explorer is just one of those examples. We're not out there competing with government or other people to do the same stuff. We are saying we understand the world of salmon intimately. We've got a really high quality team of talented people, and we can find these places where we can say no one is doing this and it should be done. And then we can use our support, our resources, our capacity to make it happen. And we can be nimble too. Unlike a government machine that has to wait months or years to do something new, we can be presented with an opportunity or a problem. And we've jumped on things and said yes to them within days. Where there was, say, a really neat habitat restoration project in the Adams River that a lot of people will have seen, the great salmon run that returns there every 4 years. And you can basically drive right up to it and see thousands of salmon spawning at your feet. Yeah. But there were some of the channels that were dried up because of the way the river had shifted. And DFO and First Nations groups came to us and said, we want to fix this. But this was last year. We have to fix it before the water comes up. And so they had 3 or 4 weeks to get the work done, and they needed some money to do it. And we took that proposal in, talked about it with our team, took it to our board. They said, yes, go for it. We provided the money, and 10 days later, they were out there working.
Oh, what a great story.
Nobody else can do that, right? But these are the kinds of things when we have resources available and the really good opportunities come along, we can action them.
2 years ago, Premier Horgan made a $5 million contribution on behalf of the taxpayers of British Columbia. I shouldn't say it was his money, it's the taxpayers' money. But we think it was a good decision on his part just to give us a $5 million grant over 5 years to do just what Jason talked about. Because we can be nimble, we can be efficient with these relationships we have with community organizations and First Nations. We can make a dollar stretch really far, right? And so that's why that grant was made to us, so that we could be able to make those types of investments. So, and that was that side channel. They had it it was, I think it had been there and then failed, and it was rebuilt, watered, and the fish were there like that.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I went out there with a little GoPro camera a week after they had watered it. And on our YouTube channel, you'll see my little video of juvenile sockeye salmon swimming in a place that was bone dry 10 days before.
Habitat that they needed.
Great story.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's your annual operating budget, Michael?
Well, it's been around $8 million the last few years.
Okay.
We took a fairly significant jump over the last 10 years because we've gotten more into science.
Yeah.
And that tends to be more costly and supported by government and large institutional investors. I should note that we have the great benefit of getting annual support from the Pacific Salmon Endowment Fund, which is a wholly independent and separate entity that exists to invest funds in various salmon activities. And they invest about 60% of our annual operating budget comes from the endowment. And then they have been funding $1 million or $2 million a year into our other strategic initiatives, our science initiative. Jason's working on a climate adaptation for salmon initiative. And without the Pacific Salmon Endowment Fund, we would not be able to do the scale of things. And here's the key thing, too, Andrew. Because we get that support from that endowment fund, that means roughly 85 and 90 cents of every dollar given the year that's donated goes to a project, right?
Right on.
Jason
As opposed
and I,
to fundraising.
No,
or
we're not out there
administration
raising
or-
money for pens and
Right.
pads of paper,
Yeah.
and this is, and many of our salaries we get covered under the grants that we raise,
Yeah.
So we're a very efficient and lean operation. Jason and I don't sleep. We're we have a lot of makeup on that your staff helped us with. I'm just kidding. But that's key, I think, particularly for donors who are becoming so much more judicious and doing a little research on their own on organizations, is to make sure you're efficient. That most of the money is going to projects, not
It's really important.
buying the
I look at that all the time whenever we make donations. I take a look at the CRA charity listing website and
yeah.
see how much goes towards administration and fundraising. So, but just to make sure it goes without, goes without saying, but we should say anyone who donates to the PSF gets a tax, like a donation tax receipt.
Yeah, well, I think the way to say it is that we are a registered federal charity.
Yes.
And so under the very favorable tax deduction rules that we have in Canada and the United States, you get a nice rebate on your donation that you make. So yes, we're a fully federally registered nonprofit. And we're set up to help people part ways with their money any which way they like.
So it's not just necessarily cash donations. You also take shares.
That's right.
Yeah.
You took the words right out of my mouth.
Yeah.
You can make that cash donation. You can donate appreciated shares. You can write us into your will. You could donate, land that you have, and we'll sell it and turn it into money that we then use for projects. We're on a big kick right now to get people to become monthly donors.
Yeah.
Even folk who are parents or younger folk that may not have as much money.
Adopt the salmon program.
Jingle, however you want to put it. You get a bumper sticker.
Yeah.
You adopt that salmon,
Yeah.
right? The one you. But $10, $20 a month even. This has been very successful with many of the international development charities where you get a large volume of people. Bernie Sanders is probably the best example. He gets 1 million people giving $20 a month, and before you know it, you got real money, right?
Yeah.
So that's why doing things like this, your show, is really important. We need more people. I guess my point is, if all you could do is $5 a month, please do it, right? Because you're not the only one doing that. If there's 100 other people in a month that decide to do that as well, before you know it, we're really able to use that money very, very wisely and efficiently, as we've talked about. So yeah, we're fully set up to take donations. And I think the other thing I would say too is we have a couple of big gala events we do every year. Of course, we can't do them right now with the large gathering restriction. But that's another way for the business community, or if people that are listening that have family foundations. It's a fun evening. You can come out. You can make your donation through a sponsorship. Get some recognition as well.
We've talked about a lot of the problems for salmon, but Mike said it's right at the start. Salmon are resilient, and the kinds of things that we think we can do make a difference, and they can make things better. So there is a lot of bad news out there right now, but it's not all bad news. And it's not a case of giving up or that I'm throwing money at something that's never going to get better. The stuff that we choose to do and invest in, we believe and we think we can show it's making a difference. And when people support us, they're contributing to those kinds of things, the kinds of projects we've described, the kinds of activities.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of really great success stories that, community groups have been able to do and achieve through us being able to organize that support and get it to them. So it's, sometimes it's a bit of a mistake when you're telling salmon stories to focus too much on the bad news, but there is a lot of great news out there, and a lot of the stuff that we do is really changing things for the better, and that's why we keep doing it.
To wrap this up, you saw me grab my phone. I've got 3 little ones, Capri, who's 9, Chanel, who's 7, and Sterling, who's 5. Now, I don't think Chanel was able to get a video over, but I've got 2 little video clips here.
Oh, good.
My kids are going to ask you a question. I have no idea
Awesome. I love
what
it.
the question's going to be. So the first one's going to be my daughter, Capri. She's 9. And so I'll turn this up here. And sorry, 1 second here. And let me just turn this up. And then you guys can answer this question, okay?
My question is why do salmon have to go up the stream and back down it? They have to go down the stream, around the whole ocean, and come right back. Why can't they just stay in one spot and stay in their exact lake and then wait until 1 year and then they lay their eggs?
It's a wonderful question, and we could spend a long time talking about it, but the short answer is the way the fish in our ecosystem have evolved. Every niche where something can exist is occupied. So one of the things that I think we think from an evolutionary perspective that is an advantage to salmon going to the ocean is the ocean is a lot more productive. There's more nutrients in the salt water. So if you put the effort in and make the risk calculation of going to the ocean, you get big pretty fast. And so, yes, you have to swim a long way and you have to be exposed to those predators, but there's more food out there. There's more groceries. And so when you come back, you are bigger, you're stronger, your eggs will be bigger and stronger, and you'll be able to fight off predators and competitors better. And so there's an advantage to going to the ocean, but it comes with risks. And in fact, like sockeye salmon are a really good way to illustrate this, because there's 2 kinds of sockeye, basically, in BC. There's the ones that go to the ocean that we call sockeye, and there are ones that stay in the lake that we call kokanee. They're both the same species of fish. So some sockeye have evolved to stay in their lake. Just like she asked, why don't they stay? Well, some do. Other sockeye have evolved to say, there's this great ocean out there with lots of food and groceries. It's risky to go out, but if I do, when I come back, I'm going to be bigger and stronger. And there's room for both in the ecosystem.
Yeah. Wow, great question, great answer.
It was a great question.
Yeah.
Okay, and then let's do one more, which is my son Sterling. He just turned 5 years old.
Why do salmon lay their eggs on a rock or up above a roof?
I'm sorry?
On a roof.
They don't lay their salmon eggs on a roof, sweetie.
On a root?
A root, is that what you mean? Okay, that's the roots. Why do they lay their eggs in the rocks or in the roots?
Yeah, why?
Well, again, it's a great question, and it shows a curiosity about ecology and the ecosystem. But if you think about it, when salmon lay their eggs in a river, the water is flowing, and if they just drop them on top, they would be tumbling around and they'd essentially wash away, and they would go somewhere where they might get covered in sand or mud, or more than likely what would happen is they get eaten, right? So if you go fishing, using salmon eggs is a great way to catch another kind of fish. And it tells you that in nature, fish want to eat salmon eggs. So when a salmon lays its eggs in what you call a red, which is a salmon nest in the gravel, they dig them in and then they cover them up. So they're protected. So they're in a place where you've got really clean water. The gravel has been cleaned out by the female when she digs the nest. If you actually look at where they dig, you'll see that the gravel is really clean, and there's a little pile of sand usually at the downstream end, and she does all that with her tail. makes a perfect habitat for the eggs, and then predators can't get them because they're down there in the gravel. So fish swimming by can't eat them, and then when they hatch and they swim up, they're now able to swim around and they can hide on predators. So it's a perfect way for them to use that ecosystem of clean gravel in a stream to protect the eggs from predators. They can grow until they're ready to hatch, and then they can go be juvenile salmon.
Wow.
And she did all that hard work of making the red after she made that whole journey
Exactly.
out and back.
Yeah.
You know, it's
All with her tail. This is something I actually do with kids when you're out at an interpretive event or a nature event, is I say, use your shoes and try to dig that gravel right there.
Right.
And now imagine that all you got is a tail of a salmon, and you have to do the same thing. It's amazing. They move, a pile of rocks like this in order to dig their eggs and protect them.
Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah, all with their tail.
Yeah. Good answer.
It's pretty cool.
My middle one, Chanel, well, she didn't get a chance to send a question. Her class in grade 2, talking about education, Michael, their class have got salmon that they've been growing.
Awesome.
And then and they just released them, I guess, I don't know, maybe a month or
about
two.
that time. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. My last question
Thank
for
you
you guys. Yeah.
That was nice.
Yeah. My last question from me is, what's your favorite way to cook a salmon? I'm assuming you eat salmon. I don't know. Maybe you feel guilty eating salmon. I don't know.
We've got a guy that was on our board for many years named Ian Angus, who is wonderful at smoking salmon. And
Right.
he makes this remarkable pate that he gives out at Christmas time. So kind of my answer is I prefer other people to do the cooking of the salmon for me. But I like to do, I'm one of those, I don't like a lot of stuff like sauces and marinades. I'm kind of like just basic cedar plank on my grill with some salt and pepper.
Nice.
Do it that way.
Yeah.
So
beautiful.
pretty straightforward. I think they have so much flavor and they've worked so hard. Just let them sort of.
How about you, Jason?
Well, my favorite is I was privileged to be at a place where a First Nation elder was preparing the food, and she wove some cedar sticks through a folded open salmon, so it was open like this. Wove the cedar sticks through and then propped it up beside a fire on the beach.
Oh, wow.
And we were at a gathering, and I've tried to simulate that, and not anywhere near as well as she did, but it was wonderful. Not just because the fish was delicious, but the whole experience. Being there, being invited by this First Nations family to join them to share salmon. So that one stands out for me, and it's a wonderful way if you ever get the chance. Yeah.
Wow. That's great. Great story. Well, this has been excellent, fellas. Really appreciate you coming in. We've got Jason Wang, who's the Vice President of Pacific Salmon Foundation, and Michael Manier, who's the President and CEO. You guys have been a wonderful guest to have on the show today. And for all those listeners, do as Michael said, open up that pocketbook, go to the website, make your donation.
PSF.ca.
PSF.ca.
Big orange button. You can't miss it.
Great. Thanks very much. And look forward to having you folks in again sometime in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew.
Thanks,
Appreciate it.
fellas.